Hi, I'm Adam Porter. I'm a board game designer from Wales in the UK, and I've been designing games for around the last 10 years. So in this video, we're going to talk about what's changed, what's different now in July 2024 to July 2014. So getting straight into it, the first thing that I would mention is there's more games around, far more games, and there were a lot back in 2014, don't get me wrong. 2024, there are thousands and thousands of games coming out, more than 1,000 every year, I would estimate, on the basis of what comes out at Essen Spiel and Gen Con. And of course, that's without looking at those big Asian markets, the Tokyo Game Fair and so on. So masses of games. And what impact does that have on designers? Well, it can make it feel like your game is sort of a drop in the ocean, really. Sometimes a game, you want a game to really make a big splash, but it makes a tiny ripple and it pretty quickly disappears. So that can make it feel very daunting to get your game published. There's so many games out there competing. It can make it quite hard to spot where there are gaps in the market. It can make it very hard to know what's going on in the market. I've lost track, frankly. I used to be very, very good at this, knowing exactly what's coming out. Lots of the most popular games around right now I just haven't played because I haven't had the time recently. And it can make it feel a little bit hopeless, to be honest. It can feel a little bit like a real uphill struggle to get your games made. But I don't want to start out on a negative point, because what goes hand in hand with this is there are many, many games because the market has grown. That's why there are so many games being produced, because there are more players. People are becoming more and more aware of board games and card games and dice games and party games and war games and abstract games and every other type of game that's out there. And so that means we can expect to see increased sales, and I can certainly say that that's true in terms of the games that I've had published over the last 10 years. We're approaching, I don't know exactly how many. I've got a couple more to come out soon-ish. There's about 8 out at the moment, but I've had involvement in some others. The sales have gone up, right? The amount that I was pleased about 10 years ago or 8 years ago when the first games came out. I think my first games were pitched around 2014, but the first ones came out in 2017. And the sort of sales that I was achieving, I'd be delighted if I got 3,000 sales from a game. Right now, I would be a bit disappointed. Well, I'd be pretty disappointed if I got 3,000 sales. What I'm looking at now is more in the realms of, I really want to achieve 20,000. That would be a really good starting point. And that's not a massive hit, right? The massive hits are selling tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions in some cases. They are pretty rare, okay, the ones that are selling millions. But I think the days where we used to just sort of be delighted to get a few copies out onto the market, a few hundred copies or even a couple of thousand, those days have kind of gone, and now you can achieve a lot more. So the expectations of the publishers are higher, the expectations for me as a designer are a bit higher, and actually those things are achievable in 2024. And so a knock-on effect of that is that there are more full-time designers out there, more people who are doing this as a living. And I would always say, take it with a slight pinch of salt when someone says that they're a full-time designer, because just because they're a full-time designer does not mean that they're making a really good income, right? Sometimes they're really struggling to get by, okay? And it's up to you to decide whether you're able to live like that, whether you want to live like that, whether that's the lifestyle you're looking for. So just because somebody's a full-time designer does not mean they're making a fortune from it or anything like that. They might be living on very, very little. That said, there are a number of designers who have shared their income, their annual income, on social media and broken it down, and they're making very good livings from it. You know, the ones that I've seen are upwards of $100,000 or €100,000 or £100,000 at this point in the economy. Those three things almost feel a little bit interchangeable. So yeah, up in the sort of 100,000 plus, I'm seeing designers who are doing that, but they are working hard. They're producing a lot of games. or a lot of installments of the same game. So they'll have a range of games with new content coming out frequently. That's one way of making a full-time living. But you've got to think, is that what you want to be doing with your time? Do you want to be working on the same project over and over again, or do you want to be producing lots of different styles of games, in which case it might be a little bit harder to make a full-time living from it, because some of those are going to be hits, others are going to be very, very small scale. Works for Reiner Knizia though, doesn't it? Although he has got many, many decades on the rest of us, and he's also a bit of a genius. So more full-time designers out there than there were 10 years ago. When I started, I mean, we talked about it as if there was a handful. We all knew Alan Moon was doing extremely well from Ticket to Ride. We knew that Reiner Knizia was doing extremely well. But there weren't that many where you could 100% say, yeah, okay, that person's full-time. And now, I mean, there are loads of people working full-time. I'm certainly not, right? This is very much a part-time gig for me. I've got a whole other career, which, takes 99% of my focus and attention. So this is not a full-time career for me. Another change in the last 10 years is that artists are getting more recognition, not just board game designers. Even 10 years ago, board game designers' names were on the box, right? When I first came into the hobby, the board game designer's name was pretty much always on the box, unless you were going out into the mass market, and that hasn't really changed. Even in the mass market, you don't so much see the board game designer's name on the box, even now. But board game artists, they weren't necessarily mentioned on the box, and these days they are, right? So they're almost given equal billing with the board game designer in a lot of cases, even though their names may not be as well known. Although in some cases they definitely are. If we're talking about Clemens Franz and Michael Menzel and I should know loads of these, but off the top of my head, I'm blanking. Loads of fantastic artists who are starting to get known. Andrew Bosley, for example, with Everdell. Another change is in terms of the agreements that designers have with publishers is advance payments. So 10 years ago, I think an advance payment was something we all wanted. Sometimes you would get it. Pretty frequently you wouldn't. Certainly in Europe, I was generally dealing with European publishers, and an advance payment was a nice thing to have, but it wasn't standard. Whereas now I see more and more designers insisting on it and saying that they absolutely would not sign a contract without an advance payment, and I would totally support them in that stance. I'm seeing them offered more. I'm seeing them bigger advances, and I think that's because some of the publishers who have got a real name for themselves have been quite open about what they pay. And so, for example, Stonemaier Games, Jamie Stegmaier is very open about his whole process, and we know that he pays big advances. And I think that some other publishers have followed suit. So an advance payment is where you get paid up front when your game is signed before anything's been sold. And then the money that you've been paid will be taken off the royalties that you eventually accrue, but you're going to get a chunk of money at the beginning, and that could range from anything from a few £100, dollars, euros, up to several thousand euros, pounds, dollars. And it could be anything in between. There's no standard, right? But what it means is that if your game doesn't go on to be published because the publisher drops it further down the line, at least you got something, and the publisher's got some skin in the game, which means they're likely to go on and publish it. If they've spent a few £1,000s locking your game down, they don't want to lose that by handing the contract back to you. Although I have seen that happen. I have had a game handed back to me after being paid an advance of several $1,000s. So even that is no guarantee. Okay, but at least I was able to walk away thinking, well, I earned something for my work. Another thing that I've seen arise over the last 10 years is much more organised events around publishers and designers meeting up. So designer-publisher speed dating events at board game conventions. That's where you get to meet a lot of publishers for a very short period of time and show that same game to multiple people and hopefully build some contacts that you can expand on in future meetings. But also events like Mojo Nation, where you can pay to go to an event where you'll get to pitch to lots of big name publishers like Hasbro and Mattel and Tomy and Rubik's and so on. And they'll give you a brief of what sort of stuff they're looking for before the event so that you can fit your pitch to their needs. So that sort of organised approach has really emerged since I came into game design. It wasn't like that 10 years ago. 10 years ago, it was all about contacting the publishers out of the blue, saying, I'd like to come and meet with you, and hoping that they would be kind enough to give you a few minutes where you could pitch your game. So things have got a little bit more organised over time. Another change in the last 10 years, there's a lot more information online about board game design and the industry and approaches, more designers coming together to discuss what's worked, what hasn't worked. People are still very careful about bad-mouthing publishers online, so it's still very difficult to work out which of the publishers you can trust and which of the publishers you can't trust. If you want to know that stuff, usually you have to speak to a designer, person to person, and they might trust you enough to give you a little bit of information about their past experiences. But nobody likes to slander anybody, nobody wants to get into any legal difficulties, and nobody wants to lose their own reputation by bad-mouthing people online. But you can find out a lot by joining designer communities on Discord, on Facebook, and so on, and getting to know designers from all around the world, and loads of people. They're really free with their advice, right? You get so much free advice handed out. I mean, I try and give you as much as I possibly can for free through this channel. The next change is, I've already mentioned about Stonemaier games, and you get publishers now that have these big fan bases, very trendy sort of publishers. I'm sure that was the case before I came into the hobby in 2014. There will be publishers who will have had an ardent fan base. For example, I'm looking at my shelves over behind the camera over here, and I can see some games from GMT. GMT makes a lot of really quite complex war games. They'll have a following, right? People who buy a lot of GMT games. But something like Stonemaier, I mean, that is fairly unique, the way that has blown up to a real fan base. People follow it. People check in with Jamie Stegmaier, the face of Stonemaier Games, on social media on a regular basis. He's posting, he's talking to his fans. And there are other publishers who have followed a similar sort of model. For example, Mind Clash, who made Voidfall. I think they've got a similar sort of following. What else am would I sort of think of in those terms? I suppose sometimes it's games and sometimes it's designers who have that following, like Vital Lacerda. There are players who will just buy everything that he produces. Stefan Feld, people will follow those games. The world of sort of Everdell, we're seeing more and more games in that world that people will just buy because they love that whole world of games. So I think that's really come on leaps and bounds in the last 10 years. Another change, fewer scattergun publishers. And what I mean by that is publishers who just produce tons and tons of games every year and just hurl them out into the market and just see what sticks and let the other ones fall away. That's where you ended up with games that were just selling, 500 or 600 copies and then disappeared off the market, and you never made back you might have had an advance payment. You were never going to make any more money because there weren't going to be enough copies sold for you to make any additional royalties. I think that model has become very, very difficult for publishers now because there are thousands of games out there. So if there are thousands of games out there and you're producing 10 or 20 games a year, how are your games going to get noticed? What publishers have realised is they need to focus in on 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 games in a year and really put all their love and care and attention into those games to give it the best possible chance of them having some success. I think that's a much safer model for designers. It might mean that your game gets rejected, okay, because it's not really good enough. But I think it's good that your game gets rejected if it's not really good enough, rather than it hitting the market anyway and then getting rejected by consumers. That's the real disappointment, isn't it? When you've seen it go through that process and the artwork and the development, it comes out onto the market, you've got high hopes, nobody wants to buy it, and the publisher drops it. Okay, that's not a good feeling. Okay, and a lot of us designers have been through that. So that idea that a publisher will only publish it if they're really, really sure and they love it and they're going to put in that care and attention. I can't guarantee that's going to happen to you, but I think it's more likely in 2024 than it would have been in 2014. Next big change, Kickstarter. Kickstarter was around in 2014, but it was new and it wasn't being used as extensively as it is now. And it's changed into this whole other thing where previously it was something you could go into with very low budget and build up with your audience sort of watching you and funding you as you produce your artwork and your components and all that. You didn't need all your fancy videos and artwork and miniatures made in advance, but now you do. Kickstarter has turned into a whole other very professional route to producing games, and it's a route where you need a lot of money up front in order to do the work before the campaign even starts. That wasn't the case 10 years ago. So Kickstarter's really changed. It's a very viable route to market. It's not a route to market that I'm particularly interested in, and to be honest, it's not a route to purchase games that I'm particularly interested in. I do occasionally go on there, but usually it's where there's a game which I already know I love, right? And so I might buy the sequel, the next thing in line. But I'm unlikely to take a chance on a game that I know nothing about. There are exceptions to that, but Kickstarter's changed in the last 10 years. Another big change, obviously we had the pandemic from 2020 through to, I'd never know whether the pandemic's even over now, I guess it sort of is, right? Is it formally over? I don't know. But everything changed in 2020, and one of the big changes for board game designers is that playtesting moved online. There's all these opportunities to playtest online with largely with Tabletop Simulator, but there are other programs that allow you to do it, like Tabletopia, and I'm sure there are loads of others that I'm not aware of. I must admit I don't do this very much because I find the programs clunky, right? Tabletop Simulator hasn't changed in years, and it was already clunky back in 2020 when I started dabbling with it throughout that year of lockdowns, right? It's frustrating to see something that is being so accepted into the board game community, so so utilized, particularly by designers, and yet it has the most rudimentary of utility. Like it's so difficult to use and make it work. It's not difficult to put together a game on it, but actually to play it is frustrating for me. I'm sure there are lots of people out there who get on fine with it, but for me, tricky. So I don't love that online playtesting stuff, but it goes on a lot, and you can join groups who will playtest your game across the globe, and publishers will ask you, can we have a Tabletop Simulator mod for your game? And so then you can send it out mod to them, they can get on playing it, they might play with you from across the globe. So that's quite exciting. Another thing publishers are asking for, as well as Tabletop Simulator mods, is videos. That's become standard. That wasn't the case 10 years ago. 10 years ago I did make videos because I was already making videos for YouTube. But I also made videos when I wanted to pitch a game to a publisher, and it was always commented on like this was an amazing novel thing. Like, what I particularly love about your pitches, Adam, is there's always a video, and it really, really helps. Now I think publishers almost expect it. That's not my doing, right? There's plenty of other people who are making videos too. But it's become kind of standard now. You've got to make a video. Everybody's got smartphones pretty much. So it don't have to be fancy, right? I've got a whole other video actually you can watch about how to make a nice promotional video for your game. But these has become pretty standard when you're pitching to publishers. So that is the main stuff that I'm aware of that's changed over 10 years since I got into designing games. For me, personally, what have I changed about my process? What's changed for me? Well, I've certainly got, 10 years ago I didn't have any games on the market. Now I've got 8, a couple more coming out, something like that, a couple of others that I've been involved in. So we're approaching the 10 games mark. That's quite exciting, over a decade. Obviously, this YouTube channel has grown. It's grown enormously. Okay, I recently had notification I'd had 1 million views on this channel, which is just incredible. Thank you so much for watching and commenting and subscribing. Please subscribe, please comment on the video. And the channel has grown to almost 15,000 subscribers, and it's sort of growing exponentially, right? It's getting faster and faster, the growth. I don't know how long I can keep up making these videos at this pace. You can see I've slowed down, right? I'm busier in my home life, my work life, so it's becoming harder and harder for me to take time to make the videos, hence this one not being scripted. I'm just chatting to you. I hope that doesn't limit your enjoyment of the video in any way. But the channel's really, really grown, and I'm not alone. There are other YouTubers out there making videos about board game design. Pam Walls has become very popular, making videos around similar sort of topics to the sort of videos that I would make, so her videos are worth looking at. I've really changed my approach over the last few years, and you'll have noticed this on the channel. I talk a lot about product design. I talk a lot about games as products. That's not to say that I don't think games are art. It's not to say that I don't think games are a wonderful way to express yourself. Of course I do. I think they're a fantastic way to express yourself. But my primary interest is getting as many people playing my games as possible and enjoying my games as possible. I don't really want to design games for a tiny little niche group of people. I want to get loads of people playing them. I want to see them out there talked about. I want to make some money from them. I don't feel particularly guilty about that. And so I really try and take an empathic approach to understanding what gamers are looking for, right? Trying to get down to that level of right, what are they after and how can I help them with that? What can I produce that people are really going to value and really want to play? I'm not saying I'm perfect at it by any means, but that's my approach these days, a design thinking approach, which starts with trying to identify an audience and identify what they want and what they need, rather than focusing in on what I want and what I need, you know, in terms of I want to design a game that, you know, I like, that I want to play. I'm more interested in my end user, really. So that's a change. I've seen that view being talked about a bit amongst other designers, but I still think the vast majority of game designers go the other way, right? They really focus in on, well, what would I want to play? I'll try and create something like that. And I think sometimes the lack of awareness of a potential audience might be the thing that's holding them back from actually getting those games published. But those are the things that I've seen change over the last 10 years of board game design. And if you'd like to see how I got here, well, go back and watch the videos. There are loads of them on this channel covering all stages of the development of my board game design career. So I hope to see you next time. Until then, all the best.